Welcome, everyone, to Unmuted Love. I'm C. Eshelman, attachment and trauma specialist, and some are starting to call me trust repair specialist for adoptive families, which I like. If you're loving a child and it's not landing the way you had hoped, if you're exhausted, confused, and wondering why nothing seems to work, you're in the right place. Around here, we make sense of what's actually happening in your child's brain and behavior so your love can finally land where you want it to. Have you ever looked at your child and thought, they're so smart, they're so capable, they're so something, and yet everything still feels so hard? Yeah, this show is for you, for sure. Because today we're talking about a group of kids who are often praised, admired, even envied, and deeply misunderstood at the exact same time. And that's gifted neurodivergent children. And not the shiny version, not the straight A, high achieving TV, easy to parent version. I'm not sure that fantasy kid exists anywhere except TV. We're talking about the kids who intensity overwhelms, the ones who melt down over things that don't make sense on the surface, the ones who look advanced in one moment and completely unraveled in the next. What if what we're seeing as anxiety, perfectionism, shutdown, even defiance, isn't off at all, but rather a signal that something in their world doesn't match how their brain is wired? Today, I'm here with Mark Talaga, licensed professional counselor and founder of the Center for Identity Potential. He's the host of, write this down because you're going to want to listen to this podcast, Hopelessly Gifted Podcast. Oh, never mind. You don't have to write it down. It's in the show notes. He specializes in working with gifted and neurodivergent children and families, and he brings something extra special to this conversation. Guess what it is? It's not just clinical expertise, but lived experience. And I do love me some lived experience, you know. Today, we're going to unmute what giftedness really is, how it shows up in ways that confuse parents, and how it collides with things like trauma and high intelligence. So if you've been trying to make sense of a child who doesn't fit the mold, stay with us, because this might be the reframe you didn't know you needed. Welcome, Mark. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Do you want to say a little something more that maybe I left out so that we make sure that people kind of have a good sense of who you are and what's happening for you before I ask you some meaty questions?
Absolutely. It's funny. My first reaction was, what a great introduction. I mean, you hit a lot of what I try to help parents with and kids with. And yeah, you really hit the nail on the head. If I were to expand on it at all, it's just when I say I work with gifted kids, it's a loaded word. Yeah. And I don't really like the word. It's not a perfect word. And what it really means to us in our practice here at the center is typical human development, just in some level of extreme. Something that's just outside of the norm, standard deviations away from what most people maybe experience, but it's still rooted in human behavior, right? It's all relatable. It's all understandable. Mm-hmm. But because it comes out in such a big, expressive, emotive way, it can feel very jarring and feel like, oh, is there something wrong with my kid? And the answer, in short, is no. But I absolutely understand when parents are feeling a little nervous around what might be happening when my kid can do calculus, but, can't seem to tie their shoe.
Right. Sometimes folks hear the word gifted, like you said, it's a loaded word, and think advantaged in some way. But what does it actually mean when you look at it through the nervous system instead of through like achievement maybe or academics?
Oh, sure. I mean, you're looking not at, advanced, you are looking at advanced ability somewhere, but it doesn't necessarily mean intelligence. It could be advanced motor skills. It could be advanced artistic ability. It could be advanced sense of moral justice. Any one of these things can be advanced. But the issue with development when you have extremes in it is that sometimes it's paired with things that are underdeveloped or things that are maybe more in the normative, but compared to the extreme thing, whatever it may be, you have these gaps that exist. And so when these gaps exist and they're not really understood, it creates a lot of confusion, identity panic for these kids. Well, if I'm so smart, then why can't I do blank? Or if my kid, can spend 8 hours playing Minecraft, but they can't take out the garbage, what does that mean? Are they lazy? Is there something, or are they disobedient? And again, the answer is no, if you look at things developmentally.
So this might put you on the spot, but what's one way, this is one of those 1 way, 10 ways, but what's one way gifted kids are consistently misunderstood that you wish parents could unlearn right now? Get over this right now.
I would say probably in the realm of their executive functioning, their ability to initiate, prioritize, organize, sustain healthy behaviors, things like that. that is very often not going to be up to par with how smart they may be or how gifted they may be in whatever they're good at. You're going to have kids that will make it seem like they can do stuff, and then they just consistently don't do certain things, and it's frustrating for all parties involved, really. And teachers face this too. Well, if they would just apply themselves a little more, if they just try a little harder, if they could just remember to turn things in, they'd be great. And that is not a moral failing on the kid's part. It's not a choice. All kids want to do well. All kids want to do well by the other people in their life. And when they're not, even though they say, oh, I can do it, I'm just not, or they internalize something as laziness, it's more a matter of that skill of whatever they're struggling with is underdeveloped, and they need support and they need help, and that's okay.
So I think you're talking about asynchronous development. That's what we maybe
That's 100% it. Yep, asynchronous development. And okay. A lot of people will use the term like 2E, like, oh, they're gifted and they have some sort of diagnosis. They have ADHD, they have whatever. And when you're really looking at a full profile of a child, it's more like 10E. There's things everywhere. There's exceptions all over the place. And that, in a nutshell, is asynchronous development. They're able to do something extreme in one area and in other areas. And even like something like math. They may be incredible at computational skills, and early math is so easy for them, and then they get to algebra or they get to geometry and they tank, and all of a sudden, oh, I'm not good at math. Not necessarily. It's just a different way of your brain, and that part may be underdeveloped, maybe asynchronous, and we have to look at that as an individual context.
Yeah, it's so hard for me when I'm working with parents, and this we're talking right now about 2E kids, or gifted with more plus,
yeah.
Let's call it. I'm generally talking with parents, and my listeners are generally parents who have children from difficult beginnings. So trauma is in their beginning, which, does change the brain. It's not usually before birth, although that happens too, but it's in the wiring of the system. I hear so often that it's all willful. He's defiant. He's willful. Right. He just is stubborn. He just won't do it. I spend a good deal of my time trying to help flip that perception that it's not that he won't, it's that he can't. But when I say that, parents say, oh, but he can, just like you said earlier, but he can when he's playing, Dungeons and Dragons. He can spend all day doing that perfectly, but he, like you said, can't take out the trash, can't, say, okay, Mom, I'll put my shoes on now, that kind of thing.
Right.
So how do you explain that to your families or parents, maybe in a better way than I do?
Oh, I think what you're talking about is the challenge right there, which is, why is it so hard for parents to understand that? Why is it so hard for parents to accept that that's the reality? Well, because it's a big shift. There's this place where parents feel more in control, and they should be. You don't want to feel like an out-of-control parent when you have a sense of, I know what this is. And so when you present to them something different, a new normative, it means they have to, it's like a parallel process. They have to deal with the same thing that the kid is dealing with. They are going to have to develop new skills. They're going to have to develop new frameworks. They're going to have to develop a new way of being that may not be as developed as what they've been relying on or what they've been taught by their parents. My challenge is to talk about how it's all really vulnerabilities all over the place. Vulnerabilities for the parents, vulnerabilities for the kids. And on some level, you also want to have them see that obstinance and defiance as potential, as an ability to stand up for themselves, as an ability to express something. But your job as a parent is not to challenge that or get into a power struggle, because with most gifted kids, you're going to lose. And that's just the way it is. It's more about how you help that child expand their understanding of where the defiance is coming from, so that it remains the child's issue to deal with in their life, no matter what they've been through. And that's not easy.
So here's another sort of parent. I can hear my parents asking these questions in the background, So they're like, yeah, but okay, let's say that, like you said, that if you pick on this PowerPoint, you're going to lose. And let's say a teenager is standing on his dime, like, no, I'm not going to give you my phone. No, I'm not giving you my phone. And then the parent's like, well, you give me your phone and then we're going to go get in the car and we're going to take a nice trip that you want to go on. So give me your phone because we're not taking phones with us. And the kid is like, no, no, no. Then the parent says, well, I can't reward him by taking him on the trip with the phone. He can't have the phone and go on the trip too. So now I guess we're not going on the trip. So, yeah. So can you speak to that a little?
Sure. I mean, on one level, depending on what you're up against, really. I mean, that specific moment is really tricky because, yeah, you might have to know that you cancel a trip in order to say, this is our value system and our belief system in this household, and we will not budge on that. And so, yeah, you might have to tank a trip. It's kind of how they teach you with parents as kids in a grocery store and they have a tantrum and they're losing it, and you just got to leave. You leave your groceries right there and you go out. What I try to expand upon is that there's a lot of things that lead up to that point. A lot of kids who struggle with that level of control, because that phone might mean something for them. It might mean safety. It might mean escape. It might mean, my only way of regulation is in this little box, and this trip is actually making me more anxious than I thought. And you're not going to really deal with that in the heat of the moment. This kid's not going to understand that. What I like to teach parents is a lot of predict and prescribe. If you know your kid has this pattern, and you can predict it's going to happen, you do have to get in front of things a lot earlier. And for some kids, what they really need is structure and framework. Do they know exactly what's going on in that trip? With some, obviously, things can change at any moment. But they might need that. Their executive function about going on a trip might be already taxed, and they're not sure how they're going to navigate it. And so they're getting defensive, not because they're disobedient, but because they're scared on some level. If they don't have an awareness of that, you're not going to just create it in the moment. But you got to just know that maybe there's more going on to this defiance and this power struggle than you think. And, obviously without knowing all the details, it's hard for me to give specific things, but it's really it's more complicated than you might realize about why a child might do that.
Well, and that's what I know. And what I feel like is that kids get punished quite a bit for a situation very similar to this. It doesn't matter if you're going to the jumping park or you're going to go to the skateboard, ramps, or you're going to go on vacation or a trip or whatever. The anxiety of that is huge often for kids. And then the consequence is often you don't get to go. Well, you don't get to go here or here or here or here. I mean, you don't get to go a lot. It's like you're being punished a lot for what I see as your neurodivergence. Or your, trauma brain, whatever you want to call it. It's hard. It's hard for me to give I think my advice is good, but I can't seem to give the best advice that parents will go really wrap their brain around. Like, oh yeah, I guess that's right. So what do you think about that? What do you think about making accommodation in the moment for upset that feels to parents like rewarding the behavior rather than just allowing, accommodating and moving forward?
That's a great question. And, one of the things that parents need to realize is that if that kid is sticking to their guns, so to speak, around that kind of an issue, you keep it as their problem, right? It's the child's inability to extract themselves away from something, to regulate themselves without that something they feel like they need. And so it's more about reflecting in the moment, like, okay, look, it's clear to me that you feel like you can't do this without your phone, that you don't feel like you know how to yet. If that's what you need in order to feel okay, then go ahead. But the reality is you've got to look at how that pattern exists in your life where you are never able to leave without it. And are you aware of why that is? Do you understand for yourself as a person why this is much of a struggle as it is? So in those moments, you're trying to reflect that it is not really the parent's problem to solve for the kid. That's where parents get stuck. I have to solve this. I have to behaviorally figure out how to get that kid on board with doing it in this way. And you really don't. You just have to reflect back the struggle of what that child is not seemingly able to do at that point in their life with no judgment. That's just where they are. You meet them where they're at. And try to highlight that that's the issue that the kid needs to think about a little differently for themselves. And that way it won't feel like, okay, the kid won and now they get everything they want. You're trying to reframe their own understanding of why it's as much of a struggle as it is.
We sure can't do that in the moment though, right?
Well, I always like to say strike when the iron's cold.
Right, that's exactly right.
Maybe in the heat of it, no, because again, when anxiety goes up, processing goes down. And a child's ability or anybody's ability to really critically think about something in the heat is probably not the best time. But you can always go back to it and be like, we had that trip to the trampoline park and, we were talking about the phone and I was thinking about it more and I started to realize how much of a struggle that is for you. So you can always do it later. And I always tell parents of gifted kids that you got to be kind of like a lawyer, because gifted kids will explain away single incidences, no problem. Well, it's because of this, that, and the other. But if you create a pattern, exhibit A, exhibit B, exhibit C, exhibit D, this has happened multiple times in the same way. And so I'm starting to see a pattern there. It happened on this day, this day, this day, this day. That gifted kid will be smart enough to recognize that there's something in what you're saying.
So I like it that you're framing it for gifted kids, because I know that there are some kids, let's say kids who have fetal alcohol exposure, something like that, where their cognitive function is low.
Right.
Yet they are neurodivergent too, right? So they have
Absolutely.
ADHD and they, their cognitive function is low. So that reasoning piece is rarely online to have that high level of discussion about cause and effect, for example, which doesn't really exist for them for a very long period of time because of that asynchrony.
Oh, absolutely. And it might not get there. They might not ever get to a stage of awareness. And that may be what you're up against. And so, yeah, you might have to be a little more, like I said, predict and prescribe, where you're talking through, anytime we go here, this is the process of what it looks like, or this is what we're allowed. And then you got to manage your own expectations. It won't be perfect, but it's always about staying in a process of making it smoother and smoother without just repeating the same, because it can be traumatic at some point. It can feel like punishment over and over. And everybody wants to get out of that. But you have to look at it as more of where in our process are we feeling defeated or feeling like we have, can fill some gaps in, or deal with it in a way with more preparation that does make it a little bit better given where that kid is at.
Yeah, so I tend to refer to that as front loading, right? Doing a really good job early enough to front load, but not so early that the anxiety kicks in and then you have like a week of, hell to deal with just because of the anxiety leading up to anything. So too much for front loading, not so good, but not enough, also not so good. Oh, we have to be such balanced parents for all this.
Yeah, just do it perfectly, everybody, and then you'll be fine. No, it is that difficult. And I always try to tell parents that if you're feeling anxiety about going into changing a process like that or getting things to happen, don't go in with expectation. Go in with intention. Your intention is to make this process smoother for everybody involved. My intention is to understand you a little bit more and have you understand me a little bit more. You can't lose in a situation like that, because even if they still take the phone, you can always rely on, like, look, my intention was to try to make these things better. And if it didn't work, I would love to figure out with you how because hopefully that child can recognize, it's stressful for everybody involved. And what do we need to do as a family to work through it? And it's so hard, and there's no one thing that's going to work for anybody. And so it is piecing it together for your unique family situation.
I like that difference, right? The difference between expectation and intention. I like that. I'm going to keep that, Mark. Thank you.
Oh, take it.
Because I think that really is a good shift in thinking, right? We're just going with intention. We may or may not accomplish that, which would be the expectation or the previous expectation or goal, because the goals often don't pan out. We're going to have a great trip. Really? No, we're not. Or it didn't turn out that way anyway. We wanted to. Our intention was to have a great trip.
Right.
And some parts were and some parts weren't.
100%. And I always say that when you go into something with expectation, your anxiety is already up. And again, if anxiety is up, your ability to process and think through something and really, piece it apart isn't as strong as it could be. Intention should be more of a relief. Look, no matter what happens, the number one issue is always the relationship. And parents sometimes forget that, right? And I shouldn't say that. Parents can forget that, but the kids forget that too. That it's not about punishment or getting you to change. It's about how we can be more connected and care about each other and understand each other's vulnerabilities. That is the intention. That is the only thing that really should matter on some level.
Oh, I love that, because that's a really good reframe. And I often say something slightly different, but it's like, if your child can feel loved and be lovable, they're fine. They're going to be fine.
Be okay.
So let's focus on those three things for their whole childhood. They can learn academics. They can learn this or that later. being human now with your child, teaching them the basic humanity of love is really all that really matters, right?
Well, even what was it? I think it was Dr. Valiant's book, Aging Well. They did that Harvard study and they found out like what made, parents successful with children, or what made children quote unquote successful. And it was the same thing. It was that child loved? Did they feel loved? And did they feel safe? And those were the predictors of if a kid is going to be more likely to be okay. And if you can remember that, I think it makes, sometimes makes the job a little easier.
I think it really does. Because if you can drop all those expectations of what should be happening, because our kids, they don't fit into the should box very well.
No.
So, Mark, you reframe a lot, just judging from your podcast. I haven't interviewed you before, but you reframe a lot of the conflict or the difficulty challenges, let's say, as environmental misfits. Not that kids are misfits, but it's an environmental misfit.
Right.
Can you help parents a little bit with how to understand when their child's environment is out of sync versus when when we need to kind of shape them to fit? If that makes any sense.
Well, it's a two-way street because it's both a child understand, I always say, like with my kids they're brilliant kids, but like the way school is designed with homework and it's pure executive functioning on some level, it's like, look, you're not going to be the best at school, not that you're not smart, but just at the game of school. That might not be where you're going to excel in life. And I don't want you to judge yourself based off of that. But at the same time, there's a responsibility. And you have to understand that isn't a great fit for you, but your job isn't to say, oh, I'm a victim to that and school's the worst and I'm just not going to go. It's more like you've got to figure out what you need and how to change in order to advocate for yourself better, to say where you need more help, to, challenge appropriately on some level, or to have parents advocate on your behalf to try to create a better fit. So our center is the Center for Identity Potential. And what that really means, it's a long, name, but the idea is, we are just people. We are not our identities. I'm not just a counselor. I'm not just a podcast host. Because if I was only my identity and all of a sudden I lost my voice, I'm going to come apart. I can't do these things. That's who I was. That's who I am. Identities are just expressions of who we really are. And our job in life is to create identities that fit. A student might want to say, my identity is I'm a 4.0 A+ student. And I will say that's partially true, but look at all these challenges and struggles. I think your identity may be a better fit that you are a gifted asynchronous student who needs to deal with his life and his world of how he expresses that so that they remove some of these expectations on what should be and rather be a better expression of what really is. And when we have healthy identities that really express who we are, we say we don't reach potential, we activate it. We become more inclined to do things or try things or, take more stuff on. And when we're in identities that don't fit us, that activates negative DNA. This is where illness and mental health deterioration and a lot of things can get exacerbated by or come from. We do a lot of work with people on, what is that identity that you're trying to express out of yourself in this context, that context, right? And it has to be a fit for you. Like, you and I are very similar in a lot of ways, and I think our Venn diagram probably overlaps pretty well. But the idea is my podcasting versus your podcasting has to be both of us authentically, or else we start to be like, this isn't really what I want to be doing. This isn't really how I want to be doing this. It's not really me. And we may say, well, maybe I'll try again later.
I want to bring your lived experience in because you've lived this. You did some good thriving early as a game creator. Is that right?
I worked in the video game industry and it was me trying to solve a problem in my life of I would be good enough at stuff where I would get praise for it, but then I would, inevitably get bored. And so I'm moving on to the next thing. What I found out years later was I wasn't so much bored as I was frustrated that I didn't know how to grow. I never knew how to learn, how to develop mastery, how to face the challenge of it, how to kind of suck at something for a little bit. That was intolerable to younger me and maybe a little bit to older me. So I was like, well, if I can get into the world of video games, which I love to play, or I did a lot, that'll solve all that issue. But it didn't. And eventually I went into that world, and I was on the production side of things, which is organizing and scheduling and budgeting and managing other teams. And guess whose executive function didn't like that?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I got let go. They said, look, you're not meeting what we need from you, and you're fired. And it hit me like I'm like, who am I then? Like, I built my whole identity around this. It put me on a soul searching, and I knew I wanted to help people. And I had therapy, when I was a teen, and it was very helpful for me. And I thought maybe I could do that. And it wasn't really until I met my mentor, Andy Mahoney, who really created the world of counseling the gifted with a couple other of his colleagues. He was the one to say, look, man, like, you're going to have to face how bad you are at some of this stuff and how much support you might need. And we're going to have to learn how to be okay at that, because I can see how good you could be at this. And it was him pushing me in a very loving way, but in a way where he didn't really compromise that I had stuff to look at and face that was my issues in life. He would never let me make it about him. That was what he always said. He's like, it's never about me. It's about you. That I was able to develop some level of mastery in what I'm doing. And that was where a lot of me feeling more like myself again and feeling like I was doing something that mattered, and I could get over that. But it took me years and years and years and years. And it didn't really happen until my probably 30s before I really was like, oh, okay, I got some things to look at here. So that's just kind of one example of where being bright and charismatic and being able to talk my way out of almost anything wasn't enough. And it kept happening over and over. And I had to face the reality of what I really needed.
This is interesting, because as I'm listening to you talk about how it's important to work with a kid or an adult, but to work with a person who has this challenge, right? Has these asynchronous challenges and gifts. You really put a lot of energy on that executive function of, thinking, processing, looking at the problem and looking for solutions, which is a pretty high executive function. I'm working with trauma so much that is a conversation that you're talking about that just doesn't happen very often. It's very hard to have that conversation in childhood. And so I'm glad that you said, you weren't really able to, I'm not glad for you. I'm just glad you said it.
But it was real. Yeah.
It took the 30s, into the 30s. And I'm often saying, well, my kids are grown up now. They're 29 and 31, and they were highly traumatized children. And they really only learned how to look at themselves, how to have the maturity to do that in their very late 20s. Even then, they struggled, right? They're really struggling. And so I talk a lot about, in childhood, this is really, childhood is quite hard for people who are neurodivergent or people who experience trauma. So meeting them at the prefrontal cortex is not always that possible if you're parenting a kid up to 18. What are your thoughts about that?
No, it's a really good point, because again, the prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed until later on in life anyway. But it's more of, I'm not necessarily reframing it always as executive function, though that comes up quite a bit. I'm reframing it as skill, as something you haven't learned yet, or even something that nobody's taught you in a way where it made sense to you. You may have been taught it, but it wasn't clicking, or the person didn't understand what you were really up against. And so more than anything, I probably try to take things out of the psychology of why they're struggling and more into that there's underdeveloped areas of skill, of your neurodevelopment. And it tends to, even for younger kids, relieve them of this idea that it's just their inherent fault and that there's something to be done about it. Whether they're ready to do it yet or not, that might take years and years and years. And I always tell parents, like, look, you're planting seeds and you're never going to deviate from your message, but do not expect it to turn like that into all of a sudden, this is a fully changed person who can handle anything that comes their way. We have to really manage expectations. So it is a process, like anything is. And we have to relieve ourselves as parents of being like, we need to see that change happen now. No, you don't. Everybody develops differently. And it might be like me in their 30s, that they can finally integrate some of what they've been learning in a real way. And that's okay too. And with trauma it rewires the brain. It creates brain pathways that are based off of the experience. It is neurodivergence. It is something that you have to, I hate to put it so bluntly, but deal with. It's something that you are handed in life in the same way that you have to protect your vulnerabilities around learning challenges or ADHD diagnoses. It's the same thing with trauma, but it does not define you. It is not your identity. It is not who you are. And I know this is your work and exactly what you do, so I'm probably preaching to the choir, but that is, that's kind of how I like to view and reframe for a lot of parents.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And for myself, I had a pretty traumatic early beginning, actually not early, my entire childhood, but it didn't occur to me that the things I struggled, this is a long time ago, right? Because I'm nearly 70. These things weren't things back then too much. We did have gait then still, but we just were smart. And that's all that meant. You're smart.
Yep.
That's it.
Right.
I didn't realize the things I struggled with as an adult were related to trauma. I thought I had sort of a bad personality because I was so emotionally distressed so much of the time over little things. It wasn't until I adopted my kids and they were like that where I realized, what do my kids and I have in common? Now, at the time, I was, 40-ish years old and I'd been a therapist for 15 years. I'd kind of come to terms with myself, but not in terms of like how trauma affected me until I saw them. And I'm like, oh, this is me.
Wow.
It was me. I'm just like this. And so, that was the beginning for me of actually exploring my own trauma and how I wasn't a bad person. I'm not a bad person. I am not flawed. I had neurodivergence from trauma. And that was a late awakening.
It's a beautiful thing that you're sharing because I think all parents, when they hear, maybe this is a little too woo-woo voodoo, but I truly believe that no matter who our kids are, they're given to us for a reason. And our kids challenge us in those ways that we need to be challenged the most. And when we're frustrated that our kids aren't a certain way, it's more of a gift than anything, of a realization of you probably relate to that kid's struggle more than you think. And you're probably more connected in it, even though it's expressing itself maybe differently. But it's this wonderful thing of you're given these kids that are going to push you and challenge you and tap into your vulnerabilities. But if you can accept that and know that it's part of your own growth and which you can accept, like you're talking about, which I think is lovely, that is such a gift for how you can become more of who you are and shift those identities in a way that is more of a fit.
I often say that you get the kids you need.
There it is. Yeah, that's a much clearer way to put it.
Not the ones you want necessarily, but the ones you need. I really didn't know I needed them, and I resisted that so much. I was staring myself in the face when I was trying to parent them without realizing that for a while, right? I just struggled with them, trying to get them to do right, be different, fit into the box better. And then, of course, realizing, oh, okay, I didn't fit in the box very well. I don't fit into boxes very well. Wonder what that's about. I don't think I ever would have seen it. I got fired from a few jobs myself early on.
Hey, see, there we go.
I know. Because I was emotional in jobs. I was, sort of volatile emotionally because I didn't know how to handle big emotions. But by the time I was 40, I'd kind of found a way to suppress all that and wasn't having these big outbursts anymore. But if I hadn't had my kids, I never would have seen this deep suppressed layer of emotional hurt and pain and grief from the trauma. They really brought it all up into my face. I was not happy for it at the time.
Oh, for sure.
But I am today. I am a completely different person today than I was when I adopted them, for sure, in such a better way. I'm such a better person.
It's going to affect how you do your work. It's such a, in my head, as you're talking, I'm like, man, she's a good therapist. Like, man, she's got to be so helpful to so many people because like you're talking the talk and walking the walk of those big emotions. Yes, they're not bad things. They can create situations that people don't know how to handle or you don't know how to handle yourself, for sure. And a lot of kids go through this, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to this. But it's potential. It's an area that, if you can cultivate it or you can go through a process like you did with your kids of awareness and understanding around it and then integrate it into your work, look out. That's... you're going to be able to really help a lot of people who are struggling with the exact same thing because it's a very human thing.
Right. Well, it's back at you, right? And the same thing for you.
Appreciate that. Yeah. No. Well, somebody's got to do it.
That's what I say.
Yeah, right?
You're like, how did you raise those kids? And now you're doing this. I'm like, yeah, somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
Might as well be me. I know a lot about it.
Mm-hmm. I feel that.
So, Mark, what gets missed most often with neurodivergent kids gifted kids or just neurodivergence, right? There's ADHD, dyslexia, autism, and giftedness, right? These all fit into that category. There are others as well. What gets missed, especially when executive functioning struggles are hiding behind things like bravado or arrogance, maybe, kids are like, I know, I get it. You don't have to tell me anything. You can't tell me anything. I was born knowing everything.
Yeah, I like a little bit of ego on a kid. I'm like, okay, yeah, a little bit of ego ain't going to hurt you. It'll probably take you somewhere in life. This may sound heretical to anybody that's like rooted in the gifted world, but my belief really is that all gifted kids are 2E. All gifted kids have asynchronous development somewhere on some level. Some hide it better. Some, it never really comes out in a way that maybe gets in the way of their life, or they just kind of set up in a way where it's fine, but it's always there. And so when you're dealing with giftedness, you're dealing with something you're missing more than likely. And yes, it could be executive functioning. It could be language processing. It could be auditory processing, sensory processing. It could be, yes, autism type things, pragmatic and language issues. There's a number of things that are creating challenges that get in the way of what that kid's wanting for themselves. I always tell kids, they come in here and I'm like, we're not here to talk about your problems, so to speak. I'm here to talk about what you want to make happen and what tends to get in the way of that and what you might be missing that you're not understanding yet or haven't been educated on yet that can help you continue to move in the direction you want to move in. That's really what it's about. We're in a growth process. Too much of therapy is about, like what's wrong with you? And, I don't even like labels, really. I feel like labels flatten a person. Oh, you're just this thing. And it's always much more complicated. And so the thing that I want parents to really know the most is just assume it's far more complicated than you think. But the idea is when you start to embrace complexity and start to understand that there's multiple systems involved and multiple pieces of this puzzle and things like even diet and, disease and other things that impact, the more you start to expand your variables, it actually starts to solve things better. But people try to stay too simplistic. They want it to be a specific label. That's happening more and more and more. And people are like, oh, well, he's got ADHD, so that explains everything. No, it does not. Not by a long shot. It'll explain some things. But we have to look at that kid not as a flattened label, but as a very rich inner world driven kid who's got a lot of thoughts and feelings and dreams and hopes and fears. And the more we start to understand all of those pieces, the more we start to understand them, help them feel seen, and to be very, Rogerian about it, Carl Rogers, they will start to figure out what they need for themselves and move in a direction that's in line with who they are.
I really love that you have this point of view because I even catch myself sometimes flattening children in my mind, not in actuality, but in my mind, sort of seeing them like they have ADHD, so XYZ needs to happen. And then I realize, if I say that to a parent's going to see their child like that too, in a flattened way. And that's not helpful because children are more rich than that. They're deeper than that. They have a lot going. They're more human than that. That's one or two dimensional. It's not enough. So I really appreciate that rounding out of a child with their hopes and dreams. And they do have all of that. And sometimes we forget to think deeper and to seek deeper with them.
And a lot of times it's compounded by, like, let's say you have a kid that has expressive language issues, meaning they have a lot going on, but they have zero ability to organize it in their head and get it out. And so the answers they give are kind of flat. And you start to, I have these parents always come in and they're like, I think my kid might be a sociopath. I'm like, what?
Oh, yeah.
What do you think they're going to be a sociopath? Well, they never show remorse. They never. And I'm like, it's probably the opposite. They feel so deeply. They feel so impacted by the situation that they can't even face it. And so they detach. Mm-hmm. And that's not a sociopath. That is a deeply feeling, incredibly sensitive kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what if we look at it like that? What changes? How do we then start to deal with them? How do we then start to understand them? But it can become very difficult because a lot of these kids don't do themselves any favors. They don't know any better. I'm not blaming them. But it is developmentally, there are challenges that are making it harder to find all those pieces. And so that's why, I like parents that listen to podcasts like this, because they're trying to educate themselves. They're trying to learn more. They're trying to expand their own understanding, and they don't have ego about themselves that they know how to do it all and they'll just do what their parents did or their way's the right way. They know there's more to learn because we are very complicated creatures. And when you're dealing with extremes, that's going to come out.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. Hey, I'm pretty sure we could just go on, but I want to make sure I do have one last question, but I'm going to ask that after I ask you to share how people, if they want to get in touch with you or know more about what you do, they can do that. So share a little bit about what you're up to these days.
Absolutely. So we'll start with the Center for Identity Potential, which you can find at centerforidentitypotential.com. We do telehealth. We work with people all over the country. For those that are interested in really understanding, what's going on with their gifted kid or neurodivergent kid or extreme kid. We really like the complicated cases, And so, if that's helpful to you, we run things like parent support groups, and we do sometimes Zoom webinars and things like that. And then if you're interested in listening to the podcast where I do talk about a lot of the issues we talked about today in some depth, you can find it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts under Hopelessly Gifted. You can, I believe we have some socials at Hopelessly Gifted for Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that.
Great. Thank you so much. And everything will be in the show notes, folks. So you don't have to write that down. You can just go there and find it and even click on it to get there. Here is my last question. You ready?
Alrighty.
It's the mic drop question.
Okay.
Okay. No, just kidding.
See, you're killing me. Okay, I'm ready.
If parents could walk away holding just one truer belief about their neurodivergent child, which again is that flattening neurodivergence. What is that? That's like 500 different things. But if they could walk away with one truer belief, something that would change how they show up today when their kid, shows up after school, what would it be?
I would say that the tenet I really want people to adopt is for the gifted or the neurodivergent or just the asynchronously complex. For these kids, the complex is simple and the simple is complex. And so a lot of times that understanding will solve a lot of, oh, I see. They're able to do this at this level when it's super complicated, but the simple things, the things that I feel like they should do are so complicated for that kid that you've got to understand that there's more to it in helping them develop whatever it is, you want them to develop for themselves in life. So, yep, that would be what I would say.
I like that. I often say slow is fast, and that's sort of a version of that.
Absolutely. Right. I need to slow it down first. Yeah, exactly.
So, Mark, thank you so much for joining me here today. This has been an enlightening conversation and a truly sweet one, too. And I'm sure that my listeners are having some light bulbs go on and getting just a new look at it. When you hear me talk all the time, you can kind of tune me out. So it's nice to have another voice on the same side. So thank you for joining me here.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, C.
Hey, folks, if this helped you feel less alone in parenting your child, stay with me. Come back. These are the kinds of things we talk about every week on Unmuted Love. Remember, your love matters, parents, when more than love is required. I'll see you in the next episode.